Hello, everyone. Welcome to McGill Cares, a weekly webcast series to support family and informal caregivers. I'm Claire Webster, a certified Alzheimer care consultant, a former caregiver, and founder of the McGill Dementia Education Program. These webcasts are made possible thanks to the generous contribution of various donors. Today, we're going to be discussing the topic of grief, a topic that I know very well, and one that I've had to cope with over the last few years. So my own journey is one that in 2004, after a very difficult pregnancy with my third child, my father was shortly diagnosed with congestive heart failure. I have to say that I have no recollection whatsoever about my daughter's first 3 months of life because I spent most of my time in the hospital. 2 months after my daughter's birth, my father passed away at the age of 85 years old. I was by his side. I was alone. My husband happened to have some horrible virus at the time and couldn't be with me. So I was by his side when he passed away. Shortly after that, about a year after my dad's death, my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And for more than a decade, I was her caregiver. And never realized that on this journey, I was experiencing what we will be discussing today called anticipatory grief, that I had actually been mourning everything that she was losing for such a long period of time. And then finally, in May of 2016, my mother passed away. I have to say that I wasn't prepared at all for the advanced stages of dementia. The change came in her condition very, very quickly. And from the moment that I had received the call, my mother had passed away within 36 hours. I was by her side. I witnessed her death. I was alone once again. And, you know, when we talk about grief, I was never counseled on it. I never sought support afterwards. And like many people, you know, I was told, especially because I had been caring for a mother for such a long time, you know, you'll be better off when she's not there. At least you can breathe. But I would have never come to imagine the impact that her death, and also never really properly coping with my father's death, would have on me, you know, and especially witnessing this. So, you know, when I was coming up with ideas for this webcast series, I thought that this was one that would be exceptionally important, especially in light of also the COVID crisis and the number of people that are losing loved ones today. So I would like to welcome my guest, Corrie Sirota. Corrie is a clinical social worker and sessional lecturer at the McGill School of Social Work who specializes in loss, bereavement, and stress management. She is the author of Someone Died, Now What? A personal and professional perspective on coping with loss and grief. She is also the co-host of the weekly radio show Life Unrehearsed on CJAD. She's a well-known speaker and facilitator of psychosocial prevention and interventions for schools, camp staff, community agencies, and organizations. Corrie, welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Claire.
So I like to begin always by getting to know my guest a little bit. And really the question for me is, you know, what led you to choose this field of grief? Like, why are you working in this field?
That's a good question. And people often say it to me is, what's a nice girl like me doing in a profession like this? And it's not more complicated than what you were describing. I was a social worker. Newly formed social worker, newly graduated social worker, and my brother died. He was by a hit and run car accident, and he died on impact. And my whole world turned upside down, as did my family's, as you can imagine. I had never experienced any adversity, not of this magnitude, and we all had to figure out how to do grief. So in my quest to understand and to get support, I realized we as a society don't do grief well. And we needed to create, or I felt I needed to create some services and some support. And so I went, even though I had a master's, I went back to school to do another certificate in loss and bereavement. I went and worked at a funeral home for 5 years, helping families navigate the grief process, and continued to do additional work in the last really close to 25 years in helping families navigate through this process. I tell people I accompany them through it, and it was because of my experience that I found it fascinating to be working and so important to be working in this field.
So now, I mean, we only have half an hour today, and there's
Mhm.
so many facets of this, of the topic of grief. But what I'd like to address is really relating to the COVID crisis today.
Mhm.
How, you know, so many people, our family members, are losing a loved one, have lost a loved one, and especially in the long-term residences where they weren't even able to be by their side when they passed away. How can people cope with all of this? Like, I mean, how can they cope?
Gosh, I would say that the challenge, and there's so many, is that there are people that came into this experience of the COVID-19 already grieving. And then, of course, you have this group of people who are, as you mentioned, losing people at the same time as they're self-isolating. And then you have people that are grieving this pandemic, all the changes. So there's three different groups that we can talk about, but really those that are experiencing the death of someone, what we normally need is connection. And what we can't have right now is connection. So, how do you do it? There's lots of alternative ways. They're not ideal, but they're what we got right now. So, things like reaching out to people virtually is an important thing to do. And today, lots of funeral homes, thankfully, are setting up systems where you, even if you can't attend the funeral, they're allowing people to do it virtually, virtual gatherings. We're allowed 10 people, but if you can have virtual gatherings, because we recognize you do need the connection. Everybody grieves differently. There's no right or wrong way to grieve, although we can talk about how there maybe are some dangerous ways.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of coping, reach out. Please don't feel like you have to be isolated. I know that our situation is unique, but you could be lighting a candle. You could be writing and reaching out to people to stay connected and talking about the person, and forming connections with other grievers and or family members or friends that understand, because I think we live in a death denying society, and I think that it's very important that people not feel fear of reaching out or talking about it if you need to talk about it. There are support groups. I do a number of them online now. So there's a lot of services out there if you need them, and I don't know how we can't.
I think what's difficult for people, I mean, I experienced it similarly, is that it's all of a sudden you get this shock that this person that you love is about to die. You know, I mean, my mom wasn't caring for her during the time of COVID, but you know, I saw that her condition was declining, but I did not know at all what the end stages of dementia would look like. And the week before she passed away, I had seen her. She was in her wheelchair. She was still, you know, she wasn't lethargic. She was kind of still, she couldn't speak, but she was still there. And I was at a conference, and all of a sudden I get this call that, you know, she can't swallow, and I had to go and see her. And it was just like you go into this shock. and you know, and after she had passed away, I was kind of for a long time in this, like, this tight shock mode.
Mm-hmm.
And I never even imagined that I would have to get some support for myself to overcome it. Like, I was haunted by what I had seen. And I think that that's what people are going through. It's that sudden, that shock of, oh my
Right.
gosh. So how do we get through that?
Well, part of that is understanding, and I'm so sorry that that was your
Yeah.
experience, and I know it's not unique. Part of
No.
understanding, there are a lot of grief theories out there, but regardless of whatever theory one looks at, there's a reason that they were created. We understand that the first phase typically is shock and denial, disbelief that this is actually happening. And it's our body's way of helping us cope, actually, with getting through a funeral or getting through anything that we have to do, is we just live in the world of denial. But denial only lasts for so long. And then we hit another phase, for example, anger. How could this happen? Why did this happen to me? You can be angry at yourself. You can be angry at the doctors. You could be angry at God. It varies because we all grieve differently. But from that anger, my experience is anger usually covers sadness. And so we go from anger to sadness. Sometimes in between, there's a little bit of bargaining. I'll do this. If only she'll get better. If only this could happen, I'll do this. And then we hit the point where the reality hits and we become sad. And in COVID-19 today, there's a lot of loss of jobs, loss of connections, loss of grads and proms and sports events and concerts and all. So you get for those of us grieving the death of someone, we have our very obvious losses. For those of us who are experiencing COVID and all the things that are being canceled and changed, we have those kind of losses, and we are angry. And it can be very, as you, I guess, have experienced, it can be very debilitating.
I have to say, I'm going to come out there and share my experience, because I mean, when my father passed away, I guess my father was a forward thinker who had pre-planned his funeral and made it, but it took 10 months for me to really let it all out. With my mother, after she passed away, I went into the do mode. Unfortunately, she hadn't shared her wishes with me. So the responsibility of planning her funeral and what she may or may not want was all on my shoulders, which was very challenging, because you want to do the right thing. But I remember it was 2 weeks after the funeral that I woke up a Saturday morning and I couldn't speak. And I remember we were out in the country and I said to my family, I can't speak today. I just cannot speak. And I spent the day not speaking. And then the next morning, which was a Sunday morning, my daughter woke up and she said, my youngest daughter said to me, "Are you going to behave the way that you did yesterday? I mean, Mom, come on, you got to get over it." Right. And I remember walking out of the house, going into a field, and the rage that I expressed, I was like a wild animal. I screamed like I've never screamed in my life. And it was very cathartic, but it was terrifying for my family, terrifying for me. It happened with my father, but it was a 10-month delay. So is that normal? I mean,
so I would say it's because people always say, I think I'm going crazy. No, you're grieving. And when we don't allow ourselves to do that, we hold it, it's like a pressure cooker. It explodes. So allowing yourself and giving yourself the space to feel whatever way you feel. Feelings aren't right or wrong, they just are. So I've said to maladaptive coping mechanisms, as long as it's not illegal, immoral, or dangerous, what is it that you need to do? Because I know, and I so get it, that your daughter's comment, I hear it a lot as well from other family members, from other clients. They say that you don't want to see someone in pain. Of course, you don't want to see someone in pain, and it makes you uncomfortable and sad, but I will help the griever you have to honor your feelings. You have to have a space to do that, because when you don't have it, that's when I think it explodes and can be very, that's when we use maladaptive coping mechanisms to find our ways of either numbing or dulling the pain, or when we're silenced. One of my first chapter you mentioned in my book is called Get Over It and Other Stupid Things People Say. It's because they don't understand. It's because we're uncomfortable. We definitely have a death denying society. We don't even use the words.
What I find, though, also interesting is that the healthcare system doesn't recommend that we reach out for support when we're grieving. Like, I have never heard of a doctor or anybody say, make sure that you get some support for yourself. Like, nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about how important it is to get support. And I think oftentimes, like I had mentioned earlier on, and when you're a caregiver to somebody who's sick for a long period of time, a lot of people, I guess people don't know what to say, but I would hear over and over again, "Oh, it must be a relief for you. I'm so sorry about your mother, but it must be a big relief for you now. It's like a big weight off your shoulders." And I also assumed that it would be a big weight off my shoulders, but I couldn't believe the grief that I felt and how long it took me to recover from it, and still recovering from it.
Well, that's what it is. It's a lifelong process. And I know people, they come to me and I'm like, yeah, you don't get over it. You learn to live with it. And I kind of apologize and say, I'm sorry, because I guess maybe you don't want to hear that, because they just say, I just want to feel normal again. And I have to say, it's one of the hardest things I say to people, is that the you that was is not the you that anymore, that is right now. And that's what I call a secondary loss, is all the changes in your life. So for those people who feel like, oh, look at all the free time you'll have now, Claire. No. They don't recognize that that's another loss for you.
Right.
And so it is hard to, I want to point out that there's the primary death of the person, and then there's all these secondary losses that you experience, and that's all part of the process. And I've described grief as a roller coaster. There's times that are more manageable and times that are more difficult, and it changes all the time.
Mhm. So a lot, I think I was going to leave this question to later, but I think I'm going to bring it in because, a topic that people have difficulty addressing is when is the right time to sit with family members and really discuss your wishes? I mean, like, we discuss this, oftentimes when with regards to dementia, we say,
Right.
okay, you got to become educated, seek support, and you have to make sure your finances and estate is in order. But as people in general, I mean, how do we discuss this?
In my perfect world, you discuss it when it's not an issue, when it's not going to be emotionally, it's always going to be tough. I guess remember this: talking about death does not kill you. So if you go and you start with that premise, and then you say, okay, wouldn't you rather know what somebody's wishes are rather than waiting to the worst possible time in their lives to have those discussions? I mentioned I worked at a funeral home. I would watch families often making funeral arrangements, and the answers to the questions just about filling out government paperwork, the only person that knew the answers was the deceased. And how painful it is to have to make those decisions, and you just bury one parent, and it's the appropriate thing for the funeral director to do is to say, and would you like two plots? But so if you were to do this planfully, it would be a completely different experience. And I did have the privilege of making pre-arrangements with families. Of course, when it was imminent, it's heart-wrenching. But when it wasn't imminent and people just wanted to get their wishes recorded, you don't even have to pay for it. You don't have to pay for the funeral, but you can get the wishes recorded so that there's no guesswork. It removes the stress. It's a difficult time, is it not? It's a horrific time. Why not? If you can share your wishes and have that conversation, make it part of it's a normal. We talk about birth, we talk about life. Why can't we talk about death?
So can we discuss the topic of anticipatory grieving?
Sure. So you live in the world, your entire clientele, you experienced it, have this concept that we don't really know what it is, and you and I are calling it what it is. It's called anticipatory grief. And that's when the pain is felt in advance of. That's the future grief. It looks a lot like grief, but you haven't experienced the grief yet, but yet the anticipation of what it's going to be like, you live in that mode. So you're living in this future experience of what the pain of the changes of the losses are. For sure, in terms of Alzheimer's, you're living in that world all the time. And it's a reality that you're going to feel it, but you don't have to stay there. So the anticipatory grief is looking at the grief of what is to come. But when we feel that grief, that what is to come, we don't know. Who can predict the future? We have no idea. So it's recognizing that it's normal to have that experience and those feelings. But what you want to do is you want to bring yourself back to what you know. And just imagine all that time you're spending worrying about what's going to be is time you're not spending in now and what is. And what you know.
But that's hard. So what would you recommend? So let's say with dementia, as I've gone through it, and so many people that I work with are going through it, is you're mourning so many stages. So you're mourning the loss of the cognitive skills, you're mourning the loss of the relationship, you're mourning the loss of like physically what they can't no longer do. And it's just it's constant, right? But what's interesting is people don't realize that they're mourning. They're becoming angry, or they're becoming frustrated. That's what they're saying. I'm angry about this, or I'm frustrated, but they're actually mourning. So how can they preserve their energy, or how can they get through this?
So it's starting with acknowledging what's happening, knowing that this is part of the process. And when we were talking about the grief theories, they do culminate in acceptance. So it's accepting, not liking, not being happy about it, but accepting what is happening, accepting that this is what is the changes are occurring. And what can I do within the context of the fact that if mom or dad doesn't remember, maybe, but they remember music, it's coming in with the music that they do remember. It's acknowledging today was a good day. And these are the things, what can you do? I know there's lots that you can't do. And I know that there's lots that is changing, but what is it that you can do today that they will acknowledge and they will enjoy, and you can create memories in the present time.
And I guess it's just to finally just acknowledge that, yes, this is a long-term mourning period, right? Like I mean, I attended this palliative care conference hosted by McGill back in, I think it was in 2017 or 2018. And it was only there that I had that aha moment, realizing, wow, I've been going through this for so long, right? Like, it's been such a long period of time. So what can we do to basically support a family member or friend who experienced a death? I mean, what can we do?
So I would say first and foremost, it's acknowledge and reach out. I know we can't do it face to face, but if you can't do it face to face, you can do it virtually. You can send a card, you can send the flowers. I think we fear that if we say something or talk about it, we're going to upset the person. The truth is, nothing is as upsetting as what's going on. As what has happened. So they will let you know, let them be your barometer, but please don't be afraid to reach out and offer support. I mentioned there's online support groups that do exist. You can Google some of them. A lot of all the telehealth that's come out because of what we're going through. I myself, Claire, you know, I offer a grief camp, a free grief camp for children called Camp Jackie. That's a place where kids can honor the memory of the person who died. And we absolutely talk about the person who died, and we absolutely acknowledge the sadness, the anger, all the feelings, and then we give them a space, we give the children a space to create memories and offer coping mechanisms for how they can manage moving forward. So there's lots of programs like that we could be making referrals to, but I would say the most important thing is that we don't perpetuate that fear of, if we talk about death, where something bad is going to happen, because it's there. And I don't know about you, Claire, but anytime someone brings up my brother, I'm grateful. I took what happened and I created, as did you, created something so that I can't change what happened, but I can do things that help honor his memory. So by writing the book, by the grief counseling I do, by the camp Camp Jackie, the TEDx talk that I did to help people understand grief and take it out of that fear and discomfort that we have, and just make it a normal part of life. Talking about death helps you really appreciate life and living.
So what would be the consequences for people if they're not acknowledging the grief? Like what are the consequences of holding it inside too long?
So it's funny that you asked that. I was just talking about that with a client earlier. People will say to me, I'm good. I'm good. I'm all good. I'm over it. They'll tell me. And I'm like, okay, good luck with that. I believe it's like a pressure cooker. So we shove it down, and at one point it's going to come out. And so when people say, or you see it in anger, or you see it physically, they could be experiencing it physically, or the work I did with families at the funeral home where, oh my gosh, 20, 40 years later, I would meet them because they had had a death in the family, and I was helping them deal with that, and I'd hear about the miscarriage, the stillbirth, the sibling, the parent, some subsequent, because it's there, guys. It does not go away. It goes underground, but scratch the surface and it comes out. So what's the answer, or what's my response is that it's always there, and it will not serve you well to shove it away.
2 years after my mom passed away, it was a summer, and I don't know, I was with a bunch of friends, and we were just sitting around having some cocktails, and one of my girlfriends came up to me and she said to me, Claire, it's time to let go. And I said, what do you mean? And she says, you're so like, you're closed off. And I went, what are you talking about? And she says, it's okay, Claire, let it go. And I didn't understand. And what happened was, I think for so many years, I was so used to be in like this mode of, living by my phone, living by that, oh my gosh, that call, when somebody first gets this diagnosis that, that's going to change their life forever. I mean, I call it the shock factor. It's like the shock. And, for so many years, I was in a reactive mode, constantly like, oh my God, the phone, oh my God, the residence or my son's school or stuff. And what I didn't realize is that even though the situations were no longer the same, I had trained myself to physically be in that reactive mode.
Right.
And it was only when she pointed it out that I went, am I really like that? And I remember saying to my husband, am I really like that? And my kids. And so my journey is one today where I've over the last couple of years, I've had to unlearn that rigidity, right? Like,
Well,
I had
it's
to
our
unlearn it.
natural protective coping mechanisms, the fight
Yeah.
or flight, right? If I
Yeah.
feel threatened, I'm going to react. And that's
Yeah.
good in
Yeah.
that it helps protect us against threat.
Yeah.
Except sometimes that threat is no longer there.
Yeah.
So it's not working.
And the coping mechanisms, I bring this up a lot, and I will keep bringing it up, is, I had certain coping mechanisms to deal with my grief. And like in my case, it was wine, like a lot of wine. And I used to say to myself all the time that, okay, once this is over, I'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't fine. And because I had used that to manage my anger and to manage my grief, that even when my mom passed away, those habits were so inbred in me that it was difficult to just let go of, right? I mean, and do you see that? Like, is that something that you see with a lot of people?
First of all, I appreciate your honesty, and I think
Yeah.
it's important to get it out there. That's why I said they work. Didn't it work? They work, but only
Yeah.
for so long, and then
Only
we
for so
create
long.
other problems.
Yeah.
So this is why any kind of excessive substance use is a coping mechanism, but it serves as it serves as to dull and numb.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
the slippery slope to a lot of other problems and issues and addictions. So
Yeah.
it masks, but it doesn't really work. And you're sharing an example of how detrimental it can be. This is why I said, as long as it's not illegal, immoral, or dangerous, you do you. But if it's going to be something that's going to turn around and harm you in the end, then it's not a helpful thing.
So I heard a really great comment yesterday. Dr. Tamara Sussman gave a talk, and she said, grief offers an opportunity for growth and change. And I would have never imagined taking my lived journey and doing what I'm doing today. And it really has helped me heal. So how can gratitude help manage grief?
Gosh, it's something that I'm very gently bring up or raise, certainly not short term or right very fresh after a death. But the sixth stage of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David Kessler's theory on grief, after acceptance, was meaning. How can you find meaning from the experience? And there are lots of things that we do come to learn. And it's not right at the beginning, but as we experience, our perspective changes, our priorities change. We do become more grateful for, or hopefully we can get to the point where we become more grateful about what we do have in our lives, and we don't take things for granted. I think that's been and can be continuing experience with COVID for sure, but I've seen it through families. I've even heard young adults say, the best thing about my mom dying is, and then proceeded to talk about how they became more independent. Do you ever imagine thinking that you would hear a statement like that? That doesn't come short term. And I'm not here to say that, there's all this wonderful meaning that you're going to find. It's always going to be sad, but it's your choice. What you want to do, what meaning and what perspective you choose to take after someone you love has died.
I mean, I spent so many years in a state of anger. I mean, anger was my all-encompassing feeling. It was all nothing but anger. And I would have never imagined writing blogs and saying, the gift of my mother's illness. And the gift of my mother's illness is everything that I learned. I felt very resentful for many years towards the healthcare system, or towards fate, or towards everything that made this happen. And then I realized that it really was a training ground for me to be able to take everything that I've learned and to help others. And over the years, I've had friends and colleagues say to me, how can you do the work that you do? I mean, after all the years of caring for your mother, how could you embed yourself with this? But for me, it was very powerful and very healing for me to be able to share my knowledge with others, because I see what's happening. And, when I have friends or clients who've gone through loss, I say to them, if you can take your experiences and empower others with your knowledge, you can, it just, I don't know, it brings me joy to know that I can help others.
Absolutely.
You
And
know,
thank God that you're doing it, because
you know.
we have choices. And I'm not telling everybody they have to go out and be advocates and grief
No,
counselors,
no.
but in anybody's own little way, what you've learned, and there are lots of lessons to be learned
Yeah.
from grief, you really can make a tremendous difference in somebody else's life.
So Corrie, any parting words, before we end, is there any parting words?
I would like to, first of all, thank you for opening up and not making this the taboo topic. And please remember that as I say in a TEDx talk that I did, grief is like an open wound. It heals, but the scar will always remain. The deeper and more pronounced the scar, the more profound the love. So just hold on to that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience and time. This was not an easy topic to talk about, and I think it's taken all of my strength to not sit here and burst into tears. But I think it's an important topic, and I really encourage people to seek out support. I mean, you can't go on this journey alone. You can't go on the journey alone when you're caring for any individual with a long-term illness. You know, you have to seek support. Don't keep saying, I'm all good, it's all good, I'm all fine, because you're not, because there are consequences and ripple effects, right?
It's okay not to be okay.
It's okay not to be okay. So make sure that you tune into Corrie and Matt Delvecchio on Sundays at 4 p.m. on CJAD on Life Unrehearsed. I'm very excited because next week I get to interview the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine. We will be discussing how the pandemic is changing the way we teach students and provide care with Dr. David Eidelman, Vice Principal, Health Affairs, and Dean of the Faculty of Medicine at McGill University. Gosh, I can't wait for that. I think I'll be a little bit nervous interviewing the Dean. I'd like to just end by saying this webcast is an initiative of the McGill Dementia Education Program. Again, if you like what you see, to make a contribution or for more information about our program, please visit mcgill.ca/dementia. And if you have specific topics or questions that you would like us to address during our weekly webcasts, please email us at dementia@mcgill.ca. Until next week, take good care of yourselves and your loved ones. Thank you for tuning in.